Hello everyone, welcome to Archaeoviking. Today is the third video in my series on the history and origins of modern East Asia. The subject of today's video is the Sengoku period of Japan, a 100-year-long period of conflict that also witnessed great technological advancement and political and philosophical developments. So when we hear in our modern minds the name Japan, we immediately think of the Japan as we know it now. A nation consisting of of one uh, of a couple of decently large islands and a couple of moderately sized islands. Um, and this nation is off the coast of the two Korean nations, China and Russia. And of course, this makes sense, much like it made sense on how we viewed Mongolia and China from our previous two videos. It's how we've known it. Japan has been this way for over 100 years, and of course, none of us in the modern era know it and buy anything else. However, again, much like Mongolia and China from the previous two videos, this is not the full picture. I mean, Japan did not always look like this. Sometimes it did in the past, but also sometimes it didn't. So, in order to get the full picture of how modern Japan began to crystallize into this form, we have to go back to the Sengoku period and other preceding periods to get some context. Okay, so before the Sengoku period, Japan was unified by the Ashikaga shogunate, a shogunate that was founded in 1336 to 1573 CE. So, to give a little definition here, the shoguns were essentially would be sort of equivalent to, say, the five-star general or the general of the army or something like that, the supreme commander of all of the Japanese military. Whereas the Emperor of Japan uh, was supposed to be the true ruler of Japan. Of course, that's not how it often worked. There were several shogunates, such as the Kamakura shogunate before the shogunate that preceded the Ashikaga shogunate, were essentially these shoguns, while they were not the emperor, were the real power behind Japan. Oftentimes, the emperor was a figurehead, and the Ashikaga shogunate was no different than that. The shoguns held the real power. And the shoguns, alongside the emperor, made their capital in the city of Kyoto that you see here, which I believe is on the sort of southern part of the big island of Japan. Um, yeah, right over here. Here is Kyoto, which was the traditional capital of Japan overall and the traditional base of both the shogun and the emperor, and of course the headquarters of the Ashikaga shogunate. And during the time of the Ashikaga shogunate, Japan saw for at least a little while large-scale trade between the Japanese kingdom and the powerful Ming Chinese Empire, where Japan would trade things like luxury items or items that were viewed as luxury items by the Chinese aristocrats, such as paper fans and paper screens, in return for items considered as luxuries by the Japanese aristocrats, such as Ming Chinese porcelain and Ming Chinese silk, making the Ashikaga shogunate's economy flourish for at least some time. However, the Ashikaga shogunate was also beset by many uh, internal issues. First, Japan was being hit by several large scale earthquakes and typhoons that would completely decimate entire villages, um, as well as the fact that during the uh, towards the end of the Ashikaga shogunate, famines began to break out due to crop failures, as well as the fact that the Ashikaga shogunate was inherently uh, politically divided. Um, at one point in time, there were even two capitals of the Ashikaga shogunate rather than just the one Kyoto. There was the capital of Kyoto, but there was also the capital of Yoshino, uh, in which, uh, which meant that the Ashikaga shogunate was not as politically unified as it should have been. And this was on top of the various daimyo or uh, governors, feudal lords, generals, whatever you want to call them, becoming increasingly more independent. So you see all of these daimyos here in all of these provinces, many of which we will talk about in this video. Uh, and here's the Ashikagas uh, seat of power, and you can so you can see all of these divisions here, and basically, while the Ashikaga shogunate was the quote unquote true power of Japan, it was also facing uh, it basically was on its own because all of these daimyos, all of these aristocrats and generals and political lords, petty warlords, etc., were essentially acting in their own interests and were no longer either not listening to the Ashikaga shogunate or were giving nominal, uh, the bare minimum of acknowledgement and listening the smallest amount they could as possible. And so all of this together, the natural disasters that were destroying large scale centers, the famine that was uh, causing hunger throughout the Japanese kingdom, as well as the inherent political uh, disunity that was developing through much of the Ashikaga shogunate, would eventually lead to an event that you can see actually titled here, the Onin War. Okay, so the Onin War is so next we're going to talk about the Onin War, which went from 1467 to 1477 CE. Okay, so the Onin War began when the shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa, uh, having no male heir, decided to name his younger brother Ashikaga Yoshimi as his heir. Here is Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and here is Ashikaga Yoshimi. This this was at least for a little while held the kingdom together. However, eventually the um, sort of queen regent, the head concubine, the lover, whatever you want to call her, queen regent fits the best. Hino Tomiki eventually gave birth to a heir for Ashikaga Yoshimasa, Ashikaga Yoshihisa, who was born in 1465 CE. And what happened with this is it caused a succession crisis because, of course, Hino Tomiki wanted her son to be the heir, to the Ashikaga shogunate, while Ashikaga Yoshimasa was sort of honor and duty bound due to the strong Confucian and Japanese um, ethics that he was honor bound and duty bound to uphold his promise to his brother in order to be the successor. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that the way Japanese viewed honor is not as strict as, like, say, what you see in movies like The Last Samurai, or in other Japanese inspired things like the Klingons and Star Trek, who were heavily inspired by Japanese culture and things like that. But honor and following through with your promises, especially as the head of a state, was incredibly important, and especially considering Ashikage Yoshimi was a powerful political leader and daimyo in his own right. Again, that inherent political disunity. So Ashikage Yoshimasa didn't want to piss off all the people who had their own personal armies, especially his brother. So the succession crisis eventually led to an all-out war, with Japan being divided between the Western faction and the Eastern faction. The Western faction being led by the Shogun. And so, with the start of this war, the Shogun would turn to many daimyos for help. And these daimyos would include his two best generals, or his two closest generals other than his brother, Hoshikawa Katsumoto and Hatakeyama Masanaga. This is Hoshikawa Katsumoto. This is not actually Hatakeyama Masanaga. There are no images that I could find of him. However, Hatakeyama Masanaga is famous for creating this sort of billowing cloak contraption that you see behind him, that was used as a way to, it sort of was used as a makeshift shield to catch arrows as samurai were fleeing on horseback, or say if they were charging into battle and somebody with a bow got behind them, then it would catch it. And it's actually been tested to a pretty large degree. It's been tested by several experimental archaeologists and reenactors, and it catches arrows to a fairly large degree. So it was a very good invention. And then the Eastern faction was, of course, led by Hino Tomiko, and she turned to several other daimyo, such as Yamana Sozen over here on the left, and the brother of Hatakeyama Masanaga, Hatakeyama Yoshinari, or whom you see here on the right. So once these factions gathered, the all-out war, as I said, began, and the only war saw 10 years of heavy fighting, like you see over here and over here, where large-scale bloody battles were being fought all across Japan, with especially the southernmost part of Japan around Kyoto, with the red area, the pink areas being the west. No, the green areas being the Western faction, and the pink areas being the Eastern faction. Like I said, it was incredibly large scale, bloody fights. And it was also during this war that the Shogun's brother would actually switch sides. So Yoshihime would switch sides to the Eastern faction. And so this led to the Emperor Go Tsuchimikado to stripping Ashikage Yoshimi of his titles, of his political ranks. This also saw the rise of certain sort of militia groups and guerrilla warfare groups known as the Iko-Iki, several large rebel groups who were sponsored by Buddhist sects and Buddhist temples, which you can see very clearly here in the Buddhist garb worn by several Iko-Iki warriors. And so, as a result of Ashikaga Yoshimi's uh, defection to the other side, the Ashikaga Yoshimasa was forced to name his son Ashikaga Yosehisa, the person that he led the civil war against, as his heir. Um, all kinds of weird hoops and jumps and dominoes and 90-degree, 180-degree turns happening in this war. And so eventually, the Western faction would be able to defeat the Eastern faction and would install Ashikaga Yosehisa as the shogun. The Onin War officially ending in 1477 CE. However, at this point in time, the ball was already rolling. Japan was already, which uh, had already been in sort of a trend towards eventual internal civil war between the various powerful daimyos. It had already been on a trend to that. It was now in full swing. It was no longer on the trend. It was this civil war. So while the Ashikaga shogunate had gotten essentially what it wanted, it also got something it didn't want, and that was a massive civil war. And this is where the Sengoku period comes in, which went uh, went between 1477 CE to 1615 CE, which, to be fair, is a little more than the 100 years I talked about in the title. Because some scholars put the end of the Sengoku era at around 1577, 1580 CE. However, it's not as cut and dry. So, as I said, the Sengoku period saw the permanent political division of Japan between the various daimyos and political petty kings within Japan, with many of them beginning to actually eventually conquer much of the areas for themselves. And it was during this period that we get the most popular image of the samurai that we have. Now, samurai have always been around, and they were also key in fending off the Mongol invasions of Japan during the Kamakura shogunate. Sort of, the Mongols were actually winning until the kamikaze typhoon came in, but the samurai were still key parts of its defense. But the image of the samurai that we have in our modern minds actually comes from the Sengoku era. And so in our modern minds, we see the samurai and we think of them wielding the samurai sword, the katana, that you see here. And while they certainly did wield the katana, they also used other weapons, such as the very long nodachi or odachi, depending on who you ask how it's pronounced, which was used primarily to like try and cut a horse's head off, or just slash a horse. Is an anti-cavalry weapon generally, which would cause a lot of damage. And they also used smaller swords known as wakizashi, which were, you can see here, which were generally the swords they wore indoors, especially say if they were going into a tavern or an inn or something like that, because it's easier to wield in confined spaces than the longer katana. But that all being said, the primary weapons and the preferred weapons wielded by most samurai were various types of spears, such as the nodachi. It's not nodachi, sorry, the naginata, and the yari, where with the yari taking itself taking on several different forms, whether it be the sort of cross T shaped or the L shaped, uh, or just the typical traditional spear shaped. But meaning that the yari could actually have a great deal of diversity and utility for the samurai. And of course, it had a longer reach. Most soldiers and most warriors in history actually wanted a weapon with a longer reach because it was easier to not only kill your enemy, but you could stay out of your enemy's range, um, so they couldn't kill you. And the samurai work could be very, very skilled with these weapons. Uh, the samurai also used some axes. That's right, Japan did have axes. Here's a sort of a military manual showing one of the types of axes that could have been wielded, that were wielded around the time, as well as this axe being wielded here in this image of samurai as well. And again, much like the yari and the naginata and various other types of spears, the other preferred weapon, in fact, the weapon that was preferred even more than the yari and the naginata, was the yumi bow, because the samurai were, for the most part, for much of their history, even during the Sengoku era, were horsebound archers. They were cavalry, much like the European knights or the Mongol horse archers. In fact, during the Mongol invasions during the 1200s CEs, the Mongols and the Japanese samurai both talked about how they respected their skills with the bow, which says a lot about how much. Anyways, which says a lot about how skilled the samurai were. During the Sengoku era, though, while samurai are the most prominent warriors from the Sengoku era in the modern mind, the Sengoku era saw the uh, not the creation, but saw the large increase of armies consisting of large amounts of peasant soldiers known as ashigaru, who were for generally were the what most armies consisted of, which were peasant warriors wearing some either some armor, minimal armor that you have here, or some of them wore no armor, and sort of conical or bowl-shaped helmets like these, and wielded much like the samurai yari spears. And in the Sengoku era, did still for a time continue to witness trade with the Ming Chinese Empire, where the various daimyo would trade with China to get luxury items such as porcelain and silk because it was a prestige item, meaning they could gain some sort of respect between one of the various aristocrats within their own realms, but also potentially with other daimyos as well, because of course daimyos would make alliances with each other and break alliances with each other on a case by case basis. And so having luxury items and prestige from your contact and trade with the great Ming Chinese Empire helped out a lot. And it was also there was also a time during this time there was also trade with European nations as well. First with the Portuguese Empire that you see here, and you can see right here the Portuguese coming into southern Japan. And with the Portuguese came the introduction of rifles. the arquebus, and Japanese daimyo, uh, Japanese warlords all over Japan immediately saw the utility and advantage to a certain point. As I always say, guns were an advantage, but not to the degree that people think they are. But saw the advantage that these weapons could provide their armies, and so Ashigaru and eventually samurai as well would begin being taught how to utilize these weapons to great effect. And of course, being that this was a time of war, the Sengoku period saw a large increase of castles, uh, because you want to be able to defend yourself and your army from other armies. And what's the best way to do that? Castles, large fortress, fortified city that you could hold up and defend against a siege. All right, so now that we've covered sort of like the what was going on uh, economically and militarily in terms of what the soldiers were using during the Sengoku period, as well as politically to a certain degree, we are going to talk about the height of the Sengoku period. Now, I could cover the entirety of the Sengoku period, going from 1477 onwards. However, that would be either several videos or one long video. And so, for the sake of time, we're going to take a look at the height of the Sengoku period, when much of the political and technological changes took place. Okay, so the first daimyo we are going to look at is Mori Motonari of the Mori clan, who ruled the Mori clan from 1523 to 1557 CE. So Mori Motonari was the second son of the head of the Mori clan. And he actually spent much of his time in his youth gaining a reputation of being a very fearsome and skilled warrior. But of course, he wasn't the heir to the Mori clan. This eventually changed due to a variety of reasons. One, several of his older brother died, and then several succession disputes happened between him and his other brothers and his other family members, and as well as invasions from other daimyos, from other provinces and armies. But eventually, due to his skill as a tactician and his reputation as a fierce warrior, Motonari was able to gain the seat. Was able to become the leader of the Mori clan, and actually, much of this happened because the council of the Mori clan uh, got together and decided that because of his skill in warfare as well as his political influence, he was the best option to lead the Mori clan. And so during his leadership of the Mori clan, he would both ally and war with the various different surrounding clans uh, at different times in his life. Sometimes allying with, say, the Ochi clan, sometimes fighting the Ochi clan and allying with the Amago clan, as well as the same with the Otomi clan. And he would masterfully politically navigate this tense situation, because at the time the Mori clan was much smaller and weaker than all three of these clans. So he took the throne of the Mori clan in a very tense situation, very dangerous situation politically, but was able to weather the storm. And eventually he would defeat he would defeat all three of these clans, such as in many battles, such as the Battle of Miyajima, where he defeated the Ochi and the Otomi clans. And this is an incredibly interesting set of battles because one, he and the Mori utilized their superior navy. They were known for their superior navy, but also also Montanari would utilize a lot of very well thought out deceivious tactics, such as at one point when he was in council with his he was in a war council with his generals, and they were trying to discuss a way to defeat the two clans that you see here, the Ochi and the Otomi. Uh, and they discussed that on one island there was a Buddhist temple that the Mori could, in theory, have occupied as sort of a foothold to invade these two clans. However, they were it was not very well defended. So Motonari came up with a solution. He politically and militarily lured the two clans to this island to occupy this temple because his spies had informed him that weren't necessarily aware of the weaknesses and defensible, like how undefensible this temple was, uh, as he was. So he lured them to the temple, and then once they had occupied the temple, he gathered his army and his fleet and surrounded them and defeated them in this battle, effectively conquering the Ochi and the Otomi clans. And so, after his skilled political navigation and his conquests, Motonari increased his holdings from this small little red area here to all of southern Kyushu, which is the largest island, as well as part of the small island that you see here. However, the power of the Mori that Mori Motonari put in place would eventually gain the attention of the much more powerful and much more fearsome Oda clan. Though Mori Motonari would not live to see the Mori conflict with the Oda clan. Okay, now we go on to another very key figure from the Sengoku period, Takeda Shingen, who ruled the Takeda clan from 1541 to 1573 CE. Here's Takeda Shingen. And it was during his reign that the Takeda clan, which resided in the Kai province here, would begin a massive military expansion into the surrounding areas. And he also made several military innovations as well, or military changes as well, where he took and changed the samurai in his army from being horse archers and turned them into lancers, into shock cavalry, where you would charge into battle with lances and with yaris, with spears and nodachis, etc., down and just chop and tear through enemy formations. In fact, it was during Takeda Shingen's reign of the Takeda clan that the Takeda became known as a horse army, as a cavalry army. And he would war with, conquer, and battle multiple daimyo in his tenure. But the daimyo that he is most well known for battling, in fact, the daimyo in which he battled with uh, the most, for the most part, there were some that, he's the one who battled the most, was Uesugi Kenshin, the powerful leader of the Uesugi clan and the powerful leader of the Echigo province. And they battled several times, with most of them being just large skirmishes, though there would eventually be the fourth battle of Kawanakajima that you see here, that really did not witness a victory. Uh, Here is Takeda Shingen over here and Uesugi Kenshin over here. But it did not really see a victor. Because one, Uesugi Kenshin, being just as skilled as of a military tactician and leader as Takeda Shingen, was able to uh, charge through a gap in the Takeda army lines and was able to get very deep into the Takeda uh, battle formation and actually threaten Takeda Shingen himself. However, this attack failed, and Takeda Shingen was able to force the Uesugi to retreat, though not without large amounts of casualties on the Takeda side, with minimal casualties on the Uesugi side. And they would war several times throughout the years. This was just the largest battle, and they held a great amount of respect for each other. There was not, according to the sources, there was not any indication that they really hated each other, but they definitely viewed themselves as equals and rivals to be overcome. And with Takeda Shingen, with Shingen's military expansion and his innovations, he was able to increase his holdings and the Takeda clan holdings from the Kai province to encompass all of these surrounding provinces as well, making him like Uesugi Kenshin, one of the most powerful daimyo in Japan at the time. But this, much like with the Mori clan, this increase in his power and in his territorial and political holdings would bring him into conflict with the powerful Oda clan, specifically with Oda Nobunaga and his vassal clan, the Tokugawa clan, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. Oda Nobunaga over here, Tokugawa Ieyasu over here. And this would lead the Oda Tokugawa alliance to invade the Takeda clan territory and battle Takeda Shingen at the Battle of Mitakahara in January of 1573 CE. However, this was a massive failure for the Oda Tokugawa alliance because Takeda Shingen was able to masterfully defeat the Oda Tokugawa alliance in this battle. To be fair, he also had an alliance of his own with the Hojo clan at the time, but the Takeda clan was very much also militarily powerful enough to defend against the Oda and Tokugawa military. Again, the Takeda clan was one of the most powerful clans militarily at the time. So it's not much of a leap or very unsurprising to see Takeda Shingen defeating this sort of patchwork alliance between the Oda and the Tokugawa clans at the Battle of Mitakahara. And then after winning that battle, Takeda Shingen would go on to lead a siege successfully, lead a siege on the Noda Castle that you can see here and here. However, during the siege of Noda Castle, Shingen would be severely injured and would, after winning the siege, die several weeks later of his injuries. And so after that, after his death, uh, the Takeda clan began to weaken without a powerful leader, without the powerful leader in the military genius that Takeda Shingen brought with him. The Takeda clan began to sort of tear at the seams. And of course, when weakness begins to take hold, conquerors will take notice and will take advantage of it. And so, after Shingen's death, the Oda Tokugawa alliance would would reinvade Takeda territory and would defeat the Takeda clan at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575 CE. So only 2 years after Takeda Shingen's death. And here is the Battle of Nagashino, which you see right here. So now we've talked about Takeda Shingen. Let's talk about his rival, Uesugi Kenshin. So Uesugi Kenshin ruled the Uesugi clan from 1561 to 1578 CE. And he actually spent much of his young life as a Buddhist monk. There's him right here. And he continued to be a devout Buddhist all through his reign and leadership of the Uesugi clan. Such as this image of him right here wearing the typical Buddhist garb in place of a helmet, though he did, of course, wear samurai armor. In fact, he was known in Echigo and surrounding provinces as the war god of Echigo province because many of his soldiers, as well as daimyos and other warriors from surrounding areas, believed, or at least began to believe, that Kenshin was the avatar of the Buddhist war god Bishmonten that you see here, giving him the sort of moniker, the war god of Echigo. Which is also very interesting because I forgot to mention this, but Takeda Shingen was known as the Tiger of Kai. And under the leadership of Uesugi Genshin, he would begin to expand from the small little holding right here into the surrounding provinces, such as the Echigo province, and eventually, after Takeda Shingen's death, would also begin to expand into these areas as well, and becoming very powerful. Though when Takeda Shingen was alive, he was equally as powerful as Takeda Shingen. And during his leadership of the Uesugi clan, the Uesugi clan actually began to, the territories of the Uesugi clan actually began to see an economic boom because he took advantage of the trade with Ming China. He built multiple port cities to facilitate the an increase in trade, as well as the fact that he would tax merchant ships who came in and ports, so making his territory very wealthy, which meant he could also raise more army. And of course, as we talked about with Takeda Shingen, during his reign as of his leadership of the Uesugi clan, he would war with Takeda Shingen, battling several times and having several minor skirmishes that really culminated in the fourth battle of Kawanakajima. There would be some battles after Kawanakajima, but the sort of pinnacle of these wars and conflicts between Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin was the fourth battle of Kawanakajima. And so, as I said, in the fourth battle of Kawanakajima, Uesugi Kenshin would be able to take advantage of a gap in Uesugi Kenshin would be able to take advantage of the gap in Takeda Shingen's battle lines and would be able to lead much of his army deep into the military camp of Takeda Shingen. What I did not mention is the one of the key details because I wanted to save that for this section. So when Uesugi Kenshin penetrated into the battlements and battle lines of Takeda Shingen, he actually made it. Here's him right here. He actually made it to where Takeda Shingen was sitting, leading the army, and attacked him. And Takeda Shingen, according to the accounts, pulled up an iron war fan, which is exactly how it sounds, a fan made of iron, and was able to defend from the sword and prevent his head from getting cut off. And then he was able to launch a counteroffensive against the Uesugi forces that Kenshin had led into his battlements, which is just an awesome, fascinating story that to be honest, I don't understand why they haven't made a movie out of it yet. They've made so many samurai movies. Why can't they make that? But regardless of that, eventually the battle would sort of end in a draw. Like I said, the Takeda counteroffensive forced the Uesugi clan to retreat. However, the Uesugi clan inflicted far more casualties on the Takeda clan than they received from the Takeda clan. But as I said, these two individuals also held a great deal of respect for each other. Uh, they didn't view each other as they didn't hate each other. They viewed each other definitely as objects to overcome and as eternal rivals, but they didn't view each other as evil or anything like that. And nothing illustrates this better than an event in which when the Hojo clan had one begun to lay siege to Shingen Takeda's uh, capital, but also before then, the Hojo clan had also suspended trade with the Takeda clan and had cut off the salt resources that the Takeda clan desperately needed and wanted from the Hojo clan. And so, in response to this cutoff of trade, as well as the siege to Shingen Takeda's capital, Uesugi Kenshin would send salt to would send caravans filled with salt and food and other resources to Shingen Takeda's capital with a military escort, fighting through the Hojo lines to allow for the caravan to get into Takeda Shingen's capital. And supposedly, after this event, Uesugi Kenshin would send a letter to Takeda Shingen saying that he wants to defeat him in battle, not by starting which shows the respect that they have for each other. He wants him at his best. He doesn't want him at his weakest when he beats him. But of course, that never happened because Takeda Shingen would eventually die. And eventually, it would eventually die, and the Uesugi clan would begin to expand into the territory that the Takeda clan once held, that you see here. And eventually, once the Uesugi clan increased its holdings, it would also bring the Uesugi clan into conflict with Oda Nobunaga, who would lead an army into Uesugi territory to battle Uesugi Kenshin at the Battle of Tedorigawa in 1577 CE. However, Uesugi Kenshin very decisively defeated the Oda army. And he did this for a couple reasons. One, he broke a dam in the nearby area, causing the river to flood that you see here, flooding into the Oda military encampment. And in conjunction with this, Uesugi Kenshin would one also lead a feigned retreat to sort of draw some of the Oda army out, and then he would lead a cavalry and infantry charge into the Oda lines, just obliterating this army. However, uh, eventually Uesugi Kenshin would die of esophageal cancer. And with his death, a civil war would severely weaken his territories. And the civil war happened because Uesugi Kenshin had officially uh, named one of his adopted sons, Uesugi Kagethara, as his heir. However, his older adopted son, Uesugi Kakekatsu, also wanted to rule the Uesugi clan. And so this led to a civil war between the brothers that eventually led to Uesugi Kakekatsu, with the help of the Hojo and the Takeda clan, winning the civil war, leading Kagethara to uh, leave in exile and eventually commit seppuku or ritual suicide. And this led to the Uesugi clan becoming far weaker, which allowed the Oda clan to come in and conquer fairly handily the Uesugi clan. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a different daimyo, and this is the daimyo Chosakabe Motochika, who ruled the Chosakabe clan from 1560 to 1599 CE. So the Chosakabe clan was a Japanese clan that resided on the one of the coastal islands of Japan, and they believed themselves to be descendants of Qin Shi Huang of the Qin dynasty of China. This is, of course, impossible to prove, but having having descent from a imperial figure, of course, as a famous imperial figure as Qin Shi Huang, for example, um, gave elite was at least an attempt to give them some form of political legitimacy should they ever gain hold of the shogunate. Because of course you're a much more legitimate shogun if you're from legitimate royalty. And so, under his leadership, Chosakabe Motochika would begin the conquest of the island that they resided on, starting off in a very small, even smaller than the Mori clan, province, but eventually, over the course of his rule and leadership of the Chosakabe clan, would conquer all of the island of Shikoku. However, much like with all the other daimyo that we've talked about, eventually this unification would bring the Chosakabe clan into conflict with a far more powerful daimyo. In this case, it brought the Chosakabe clan into conflict with the successor to Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. In 1585 CE, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would first send emissaries to the Chosakabe clan demanding submission, demanding the Chosakabe clan to basically willingly join the Oda and Toyotomi clans uh, and become vassals. Of course, Chosakabe Motochika, wanting the shogunate for himself as well, said no. And so in 1585 CE, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would invade Shikoku in what was known as the Shikoku campaign and would defeat the Chosakabe clan. And here is the Shikoku campaign right here. And so with that, the Chosakabe clan became members of the Oda Toyotomi vassal states. And he and the Chosakabe clan after this would, for the most part, would remain incredibly loyal to the Toyotomi clan and Oda clans. One taking part in Chosakabe Motochika, along with his army, would take part in Toyotomi Hideyoshi's invasion of the Korean Peninsula during the Jin War. As I said in my last video, IMJIN. I will not have any derogatory terms for Native Americans in the comments. Anyways, within the Jin War, a war fought between Toyotomi's Japan and the Korean and Ming kingdoms, the Joseon Korean kingdom and the Ming Chinese kingdom. But also Chosakabe Motochika would also be the daimyo that participated the most in Toyotomi Hideyoshi's persecution of Christians, starting when a Spanish ship of missionaries came to Shikoku, trying to proselytize and do what missionaries do, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Chosakabe Motochika did not like this, and so they gathered up all of these missionaries, I believe it's 23 missionaries, and would execute them, which would actually turn them into martyrs for future Christians in Japan during the persecution of Christians. But it would be the initiation of the persecution of Christians that would take hold in Japan for about 300 years. Okay, so now we move on to another pair of daimyo, and that is Shimazu Yosehisa and his younger brother, Shimazu Yoshihiro. Yosehisa over here, Yoshihiro over here, of the powerful Shimazu clan. And they, much like all of the individuals we've talked about here, the Shimazu clan will begin in a much smaller area of territory on the southernmost island. However, throughout Yoshihisa's reign, he and his brothers, not just Yoshihiro, but Yoshihiro was the primary general that Yosehisa relied on. He and his brothers, such as Yoshihiro, would begin conquering the southern island until they conquered all but these two small little provinces over here, making them the most powerful daimyo, the most powerful province in the south. And again, like with every other individual we see here, this unification and this expansion of their power would bring them into conflict with a much more powerful daimyo. And much like the Chosakabe clan, this would bring the Shimazu clan into conflict with Oda Nobunaga's successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Who would invade. First, he would, much like he did with the Chosakabe clan, he would send emissaries saying, "Hey, join me. Swear an oath of fealty. Become my vassal. We don't have to fight it out. You can give up willingly." And then the Shimazu clan was like, "No, I don't think so. I think we're gonna pass on that." And of course, Toyotomi Hideyoshi led a massive offensive into the southern island and defeated the Shimazu clan, leading the Shimazu clan to surrender. And in fact, much like the Chosakabe clan, the Shimazu clan would remain, for the most part, fairly loyal to the Toyotomi clan after this, with Shimazu Yoshihiro actually serving in the Japanese invasions of Korea under Toyotomi Hideyoshi's one of Toyotomi Hideyoshi's best generals, Konishi Yuanaga. In fact, during the Japanese invasions of Korea, Shimazu Yoshihiro, who at this point in time had inherited the leadership of the Shimazu clan from his brother, would become known as the devil or the demon Shimazu, sometimes called the Oni Shimazu, because Onis were a powerful spiritual mythical creature. Shimazu, due to his skill in battle and how fierce he was in battle. And Yoshihiro would also eventually participate in the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 CE between Toyotomi forces led by Toyotomi Hideyori, the son of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu on the east. So Toyotomi's side on the west and Tokugawa Ieyasu on the east. And Shimazu Yoshihiro would be one of the soldiers in this on the Toyotomi side. They would eventually lose the battle, but Shimazu Yoshihiro would actually be forgiven by Tokugawa Ieyasu after he won the battle and took hold of Japan, which we'll talk about later on in the video. But he would forgive Shimazu Yoshihiro because there was at least some evidence suggesting that Yoshihiro only participated in the battle because he was losing influence with his family, especially all of his brothers, including his older brother, and so he was sort of backed into a corner where if he didn't participate, he might be executed. Whether or not that's true is hard to suss out, but that was at least the picture that was painted for Tokugawa Ieyasu, which allowed for Shimazu Yoshihiro to not be to be able to keep actually most of his holdings and leaving him one of the most powerful daimyo even during the Tokugawa shogunate. Okay, so now we've talked about him several times with the Mori clan, with the Uesugi and the Takeda clans, as well as his successor with the Chosokabe and the Shimazu clans. Let's actually get into it. The next daimyo we're going to talk about is Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King of the Sixth Hell, as he was called. So Oda Nobunaga took hold of the Oda clan and ruled the Oda clan from 1578 to 1582 CE. And here's the Oda clan crest, and here's Oda Nobunaga. And during his leadership of the Oda clan, he would make massive, extensive use of the arquebuses and would retrain his samurai and his ashigaru to be incredibly skilled in these weapons, which allowed his army to decimate much larger armies. In fact, at one point, he had an army of only about 5,000 to 7,000, and a much larger army invaded his province. But because of his use of the line fire that you see here in this picture and muskets, he was able to cut down enough of the forces for his infantry to his infantry wielding spears and such to go in and mop up the rest. And during his expansion and conquest of Japan, one of the largest and most dangerous enemies that Oda Nobunaga faced were, in fact, the Iko-Iki, those Buddhist militias, those Buddhist military sects that arose during the Onin War. And so he actually led a campaign into the territories of the Iko-Iki, known as the Hongenji War, which went on from 1570 to 1580 CE and saw intense fighting, like you see here, as well as events such as the siege of Mount Hiei, where Oda Nobunaga ordered the burning of the Mount Hiei Buddhist temple in order to gain an advantage against the Iko Iki because of the chaos of the fire spreading around and all kinds of things like that, as well as depriving the Iko Iki of a potential fortress later on. This is where he actually got his title, the Demon King of the Sixth Hell, from. He also conducted three sieges of Nagashima Castle in 1571, 1573, and 1574 CE. And here's those sieges right here. And eventually, after he defeated the Eko Iki in the final siege of Nagashima, he would also invade another province, the Iga province, and what became known as the Tensho Iga War in 1579 to 89 CE. And so so eventually what happened is the Iga clan, the Iga province, was proving a massive threat to the Oda Nobunaga's rise in power. And so with this threat essentially crystallized in the form of the ninja, one of the most famous and well-known historical figures from Japan, because the Iga clan, much like the Koga province and a couple of other provinces, was very well known for its ninja tactics. Now, it's important to note that despite common popular misconceptions, ninja and samurai were not mutually exclusive. In fact, most ninja were samurai, and let me put it this way: all ninja were samurai, but not all samurai were ninja. That's essentially what it is. In fact, many of the most famous ninjas, of the most famous shinobi is the proper term. It essentially means the same thing. But anyways, some of the most famous ninjas of the Sengoku era were also samurai generals of other daimyos. But with this threat of the ninja, as well as several failed assassination attempts by the Iga clan, Oda Nobunaga would conduct several military invasions, and so would Toyotomi Hideyoshi later as well, into the Iga province. The first couple failed, but eventually Oda Nobunaga would gather a massive army, as well as would gain the help from the Fuma and the Koga clans of ninja. Again, they were also samurai from the Koga provinces, and the Fuma clan from the Hojo clan that he had just recently conquered. And he would completely surround the the Iga province and invade it with this massive army, suffering heavy casualties, but also defeating the Iga clan. And this is it. You can see here. Of course, much of the Iga military was able to escape, but they also lost a lot of people and a lot of territory as well. And under his rule, under Oda Nobunaga's rule, he would start from this tiny little province here and would expand and become the largest of the would expand and hold the largest territory of any daimyo in Japan during this time. However, eventually he would be betrayed in 1585, I believe, 1583, by one of his generals, Akechi Mitsuhide. And this happened because Oda Nobunaga was an incredibly paranoid individual. He did not trust any of his generals. He often mistreated his generals, with the exception of a couple, like Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And he was in constant fear of assassination and betrayal, and so he would constantly betray many of his generals, or, as I said, mistreat them, ostracize, embarrass them. Basically anything you can think of that could have been a mistreatment to his generals, he did. And so eventually this led to originally one of his best generals, after Toyotomi Hideyoshi to betray him, Akechi Mitsuhide, who would lure Oda Nobunaga into the temple in the Honoji area, and he would set fire to the temple. Sorry, he would attack the temple that Oda Nobunaga was in, and in response, Oda Nobunaga would, who is over here, would set fire to the temple he was in to basically just say, as a middle finger to Akechi Mitsuhide, saying like, "Yeah, you're not going to kill me," and he would die in the incident. In, concurrently with the conquests of Oda Nobunaga, there was another daimyo who was on the rise, who had not been on the rise in earlier years, but was now on the rise, and that was Date Masamune of the Date clan, along with his very trusted general Katakura Kagasuna, also known as Katakura Kojiro of the Katakura clan. And together, Date Masamune and Katakura would Kagasuna, Masamune and Kagasuna would begin with the Date clan being in the small area right here, but would eventually lead their own program of military expansion, territory expansion, eventually conquering all of these areas that you see here. And of course, as the trend has been throughout this entire video, eventually this brought him into conflict with a far more powerful daimyo, and that was the Toyotomi clan in 1590 CE, as well as the Hojo clan that was eventually conquered by the Toyotomi clan. And eventually, and actually the story is very interesting. So Date Masamune would at first attempt to ally with the Hojo clan against the Toyotomi clan, and that didn't work. And then Toyotomi Hideyoshi ordered him, did what he typically does. He's like, "Hey, come ally with me, become my vassal, and I will not invade your place, your area." Date Masamune was like, "No, I don't want to do that." And then eventually he was sort of like, "Yeah, I guess I'll do it." And he was ordered to help lay siege to the Hojo clan, but then he was late. He didn't make it in time. He refused, in fact. But rather than eventually have his kingdom invaded, Date Masamune actually went to Kyoto, where Toyotomi Hideyoshi was, and presented himself and was like, "I'm here. You might as well execute me." And then Toyotomi Hideyoshi supposedly saw this, said, "No, I'm not going to execute you," and told his retainers later that he's like, "This guy is brave. He might be useful later." And so he kept him on as a general. And eventually, Date Masamune, much like Chosukabe Motochika and Shimazu Yoshihiro, would participate in the Japanese invasions of Korea and the Ming Dynasty. He would also eventually, after the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, side with the Tokugawa shogunate during the war, during the unification of Japan under Tokugawa Ieyasu. And he would actually participate in during this war the siege of Hasedo, which would end in a Tokugawa victory. And eventually, once Tokugawa Ieyasu unified all of Japan, the Date clan, Date Masamune and the Date clan would actually remain would remain the most powerful daimyo under and most powerful province for at least for a time under the Tokugawa shogunate. Okay, so now, much like with Oda Nobunaga, we've talked about Toyotomi Hideyoshi several times in the context of his conquests of various other daimyo and provinces. Now it's time to actually talk about the man himself. So Toyotomi Hideyoshi, supposed to actually say 1598 CE, sorry. Toyotomi Hideyoshi ruled the Oda and the Hideyoshi clans from 1585 to 1598 CE. And actually, unlike all of the daimyo that we talked about previously, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was not from the samurai class. He was actually the son of an ashigaru, a peasant infantryman. However, due to his skill in battle, uh, he was recognized by Oda Nobunaga and was promoted to the rank of samurai and became Oda Nobunaga's best general. And in fact, later on, after he took control of the Toyotomi and Oda clans, the Toyotomi clan being created for him by Oda Nobunaga, uh, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would do the same that had been done to him. He would actually prefer people from his same background. And so throughout his military and political career, his two best and most trusted generals, Konishi Yukonaga and Kato Kiyomasa, also came from humble beginnings. Kato Kiyomasa being the son of a small provincial lord, and Konishi Yukonaga being the son of a merchant. And during his reign, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would actually complete the conquests started by Oda Nobunaga that you see here, and would, over the course of his career from 1585 CE until 1590 CE, would conquer and reunify all of Japan. And eventually, after this, he had a problem. So he'd unified Japan, and he was looking around, and he eventually decided to invade the Joseon Kingdom of Korea in an attempt to invade Ming China. And the reason for this, I've touched on it in the past couple of videos, is for a couple of reasons. One, Toyotomi Hideyoshi wanted Japan to be the new big boy on the block, because Japan, for much of its history that you see here, it was a sort of tributary vassal state of the Chinese empires, including the Ming dynasty. And so he wanted Japan to be the big guy on the block. He wanted China to be the vassal state, the tributary state of Japan. But also, he began this campaign because he had unified Japan, and he now had a whole lot of daimyos, a whole lot of warlords with armies, and not a lot to do. Like their armies, there was no more conquering to be done in Japan. And so he was worried, understandably so, that these daimyo would eventually rise up and essentially reignite the Sengoku period, and also would kill him. So he chose Ming China and Joseon Korea as a common enemy for his daimyos, for his armies to invade. First, he would actually contact the Joseon Kingdom of Korea and would ask them to essentially let his army pass in peace in order to get to Ming China. However, Joseon Korea was a very loyal tributary state to Ming China, and so they were like, no, we're not going to let you attack our great lord. And so, in response, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would gather his army of between 100 to 150,000 soldiers and would march into Korea. In fact, the Japanese army was incredibly effective and successful for a while, at least, in the Joseon Kingdom. They quickly took hold of multiple key cities. Their use of Ashigare um, musket line formations decimated the Korean army. Uh, it decimated the Korean army. However, eventually, Korea and Ming China would defeat and push back Toyotomi Hideyoshi and his army. Um, it was also during this time that Toyotomi Hideyoshi would begin to persecute heavily uh, Christian missionaries, Christians in general. Again, here are the various martyrs from the who were executed by the Choskabe clan. Uh, but as I said, eventually Toyotomi Hideyoshi's invasion of Korea would fail, and this would happen with the counteroffensive started by the Ming Chinese in 1593, with the invasion of Korea beginning in 1592. And with this counteroffensive, the Chinese army was able to recapture most of the major cities, such as Pyongyang, uh, and defeat the Japanese army in several pitched battles. Of course, they lost some pitched battles as well, but generally the Chinese began to win more battles than they lost. As well as the an important and interesting factor of the Imjin War, of this Japanese invasions of Korea, was the fact that the while the infantry of the Joseon nation, of the Korean nation, were not doing well in battle, the Korean Navy was doing the opposite. The Korean Navy was just defeating the Japanese Navy left and right, decimating and obliterating entire uh, battalions and flotillas, uh, just sort of causing a lot of problem and crippling Toyotomi's invasion plans. And eventually, this would all culminate in 1598 with the Battle of Noryong, where a joint Korean and Chinese fleet would defeat the Japanese at the Noryong Strait, forcing the Japanese to permanently withdraw from Korea back to Japan. And eventually, Toyotomi Hideyoshi would die. But the effects of that we'll get into in a minute. Right now, we're going to talk about the final daimyo of this period, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was one of Toyotomi Hideyoshi's and also one of Oda Nobunaga's best generals and most loyal generals. But during this Imjin War, during the reign of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu would actually begin to make would begin to make a play at getting the shogunate himself, really starting in 1591 CE. Well, officially starting later in the 1600s CEs, but he really started 1591 CE. And this started with Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was one of Toyotomi Hideyoshi's most loyal and best generals, being being appointed as one of the Council of Five Elders, a council consisting of various other different clans, including the Uesugi clan. And it was here that this council of these five elders, these five daimyos, themselves didn't actually have to participate in the Imjin campaign and the Japanese invasions of Korea. Their holdings were actually relatively spared from this. And it's because that's important to note, is that the Japanese invasions of Korea actually greatly weakened the many of these daimyo in their military. The Imjin War went on for 6 years, from 1592 to 1598, with heavy fighting and heavy casualties on all sides. Something that these five elders, especially Tokugawa Ieyasu, were able to avoid. And it was also the success of Tokugawa Ieyasu uh, is also was also to a point contingent on his own on his own very skilled generals, with the best general that he had for much of his life being the famous samurai and ninja Hattori Hanzo, who was an incredibly skilled military leader and samurai who led multiple successful battles and espionage events like assassinations and spies and such for Tokugawa Ieyasu. In fact, Hattori Hanzo was the leader of the Iga ninja clan. Um, and so Hattori Hanzo, in fact, actually saved Tokugawa's life at one point from an assassination. And eventually, this skilled general actually is what attributed to Tokugawa's success. One as a general for Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and eventually to his success in sort of cultivating and brokering his power base during the waning years of Toyotomi Hideyoshi uh, through 1590 to 1598. Of course, eventually, as you see right here, Hattori Hanzo would eventually die in 1596. CE, we're not sure how one of the proposed and most commonly one of the best thought theories is that he was ambushed by a rival, essentially a rival general. Fumakotori uh, was on the run, and Toyotomi and Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu sent Hattori Hanzo with a military regiment and fleet to go get him. And according to most records, it seems that Hattori Hanzo was lured into a sort of a canyon and a river into a canyon, and Fumakotori tracked him in the canyon and lit all his ships on fire, therefore killing him. Though there are also accounts that supposedly he survived this and lived to old age. Who knows? But that's not the important part. The important part is that Hattori Hanzo sort of the was sort of the bedrock in which Tokugawa Ieyasu built his power base from. And eventually, with the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu would make his move. Well, it would make his move 2 years later. Toyotomi Hideyoshi died in 1598, but during that 2 year period, Tokugawa began to make his move, eventually officially making his move and going to war with Toyotomi Hideyori, the successor to Toyotomi Hideyoshi, though Hideyori was a kid. And the real person that he was going to war with was another powerful daimyo, Ashita Tsunari. And it was during this time that many pitched battles happened. One, the siege in which the Date clan participated in and won, but also there were some losses. In fact, one of Tokugawa Ieyasu's most trusted generals was his own son, Tokugawa Hidetada, who laid siege to the castle of Ueda, but was defeated by Sanada Masayuki in 1600 CE. In fact, the army under Tokugawa Hidetada suffered a lot of casualties. He actually wasn't ostracized by his father for this. It was just a loss, but it still was a significant loss to the Tokugawa forces. However, eventually, Tokugawa Ieyasu, with his forces, including Date Masamune and other key daimyo and military figures, would meet Ishida Matsunari and Toyotomi Hideyori and their army at the Battle of Sekigahara, defeating the Toyotomi forces and seizing Japan for themselves. With Tokugawa Ieyasu establishing the Tokugawa shogunate. And it was during the establishment of this new shogunate that Ieyasu would move the Japanese capital from Kyoto to his provincial capital of Edo, modern day Tokyo, and making it the capital of his new nation. But the Sengoku period was still not quite over. The final death throes of the Sengoku period would take place about 14 years later, when Tokugawa Ieyasu faced a rebellion at the hands of the powerful general Sanada Yukimura. So Yukimura Sanada was the son of was the oldest son of the Sanada clan, and he had actually been essentially a mercenary or a sellsword for through much of the Sengoku area. He worked for the Takeda clan, he worked for the Uesugi clan at some point, he worked for the Hojo clan, he worked for the Tokugawa clan at some point, the Oda clan. Basically, any daimyo you can think of, he probably worked for at least a little bit at one point or another. And during that time, he gained a reputation for being a very skilled warrior. In fact, at one point in time, he was called the greatest samurai of the Sengoku era. And this rebellion that Sanada Yukimura would initiate would culminate in the siege of Osaka Castle, where Sanada Yukimura would gather all of the remaining Toyotomi loyalists, including Toyotomi Hideori, and battle it out with Tokugawa Ieyasu in this siege. But the Tokugawa forces would win and officially end the Sengoku era in 1615 CE. And here is the siege of Osaka right here. Okay, so there we have it. There's the history of the Sengoku era. We will next talk about Japan during the Tokugawa shogunate. But if you want me to cover any of the other subjects that you saw here in the video in more detail than other videos, remember to leave a comment in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope this sort of illuminated and informed you about some of the misconceptions and some of the very interesting facts about Japan during this period. And I hope you all have a good day, and remember to like, share, and subscribe.